ख़वातीन व हज़रात, वज़ीर-ए-आज़म पाकिस्तान का खिताब सुनवाने के लिए अब हम आपको अक़वाम मुत्तहिदा की जनरल असेंबली न्यूयॉर्क लिए चलते हैं। वज़ीर-ए-आज़म पाकिस्तान।
Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, distinguished delegates, on behalf of 130 million Pakistanis, please accept greetings on assuming the presidency of this General Assembly session. Distinguished delegates, I come to address you in the twilight of the 20th century. In the twilight of the 20th century, we seem, in the words of Charles Dickens, to be at the best of times and at the worst of times. A century now comes to a close which witnessed 2 world wars, witnessed a holocaust, hunger, hopelessness, and the specter of nuclear annihilation. But there is another 20th century that we should remember. The candle flickers on a century that brought mankind into a technological and information revolution beyond our wildest dreams. A century of breakthroughs in medicine, in health, in communication, in energy, in transportation, and in agriculture. A century that witnessed the triumph of liberty over authoritarianism, the triumph of the free market over government control. One historian has called the 20th century the age of extremes. Tested time and again, the world survived. I come before you at this time of transition from one century to the next, from the second millennium to the third, to speak of history, of justice, and of morality. Today, the United Nations stands at the crossroads, not just of the calendar, but of the direction of the community of nations. We confront 3 simultaneous challenges. First, the proliferation of conflicts, disputes, and tensions among and within nations, and the accompanying rise of national, ethnic, and religious prejudice, intolerance, and arrogance. Second, the persistent spread of poverty. And third, the growing sense of alienation, the loss of hope and confidence by people in the world's governments to successfully address the multifaceted problems inherent in the new technological era. The manner in which we address these problems will determine the quality of life that we bequeath to our children. Mr. President, we remain deeply concerned at the conflicts and disputes in many parts of the world, in Bosnia, in Chechnya, in Azerbaijan. Our confidence in being able to resolve conflicts has been visibly shaken after the experience in Somalia, Afghanistan, Azerbaijan, Tajikistan, Liberia, Rwanda, and Burundi. We hope that the process of peace in the Middle East, welcomed by the world, will not be reversed, that all parties will honor their obligations to the agreements signed. The success of the Dayton Accords in the restoration of peace and justice in Bosnia-Herzegovina will be an acid test of the world's community's will to prevent aggression and genocide in the future. Yet, Mr. Chairman, there is another place on earth where there is a test of strength between the principles of law and freedom and the force of aggression and foreign occupation. After the creation of the United Nations, the people of Jammu and Kashmir were amongst the first to have their right to self-determination recognized by the Security Council. I would like to quote from the actual words of the Security Council itself. The final disposition of the state of Jammu and Kashmir will be made in accordance with the will of the people, expressed through the democratic method of free and impartial plebiscite conducted under the auspices of the United Nations. After 50 years, the Kashmiri people still await the fulfillment of this resolution, of this commitment, of this promise. Mr. President, the great African-American poet Langston Hughes asked fundamental questions about liberty. He asked, what happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun, or fester like a sore and run? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load, or does it explode? In 1989, as the winds of freedom blew across the globe, blowing away dictatorship, domination and occupation, a new generation of Kashmiris rose to demand their right to self-determination, a right that had passed from father to son, from mother to daughter, a torch that had been rekindled from generation to generation. To suppress the brave Kashmiri youth, India sent in 600,000 military and paramilitary forces. The tools of murder, torture, rape, persecution, arson, incarceration, assassination attempts were ruthlessly used. But as the Nobel Peace Laureate Martin Luther King said, freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. And 40,000 Kashmiris have given their lives in opposing this oppression during the last 7 years alone. India has recruited and trained renegades to subvert the Kashmiri movement, to create dissension and to tarnish the image of the struggle for freedom. Under mounting international pressure, India sought this September to divert world opinion by organizing a sham election. Those very people who claim to be front runners in the elections cannot even enter the valley without armed escorts, much less muster popular support. And this is what the world's media had to say. The Arab News of 8th September 1996 reported that its correspondent visited Baramulla this morning and saw the entire town deserted. Not a single person was visible on the streets which were being heavily patrolled. The New York Times of 7th September 1996 reported that while India hopes that the elections will blunt the guerrillas' appeal, there are many here in Srinagar who say New Delhi is chasing an illusion. The Economic Times, an Indian publication, of 17th September 1996 reported that a number of booths in Anantnag and Pulwama recorded single-digit voting even up to 3 p.m. The Statesman, another Indian publication, reported on 22nd September 1996 that Srinagar put up stiff resistance to elections today and polling was held in a curfew-like atmosphere on deserted streets. According to the Voice of America, 27th September 1996, U.S. Senator Harkin said that these elections were fraudulent and would not be considered as reflective of the legitimate aspirations of the Kashmiri masses. The chairman of the Kashmir All Parties Hurriyat Conference, Mir Umar Farooq, declared that such elections cannot be a substitute to the Kashmiris' right of self-determination. The UN Security Council declared in Resolution 122 that the organization of such elections does not constitute a disposition of the state in terms of the plebiscite to be held under the auspices of the United Nations. And this was confirmed by a recent study of the International Commission of Jurists. I would like India to remember the words of the Frenchman André Breton, who said, "There is nothing with which it is so dangerous to take liberties as liberty itself." So I stand before the assembled United Nations and urge, to thine own self be true, to thine own charter be true, to thine own resolutions be true. India may argue that the UN Security Council resolutions which guaranteed a plebiscite to Jammu and Kashmir are old. But, Mr. President, there is no statute of limitations on resolutions of the United Nations. Occupation and repression and annexation cannot nullify the actions of the Security Council itself. Statutes of this body cannot be selectively applied only when politically expedient. Pakistan is calling upon the United Nations to implement its own resolutions 47, 51, 80, 96, 98 and 122, 7 specific and binding resolutions guaranteeing self-determination to the people of Jammu and Kashmir. Kashmir is the core issue that divides India and Pakistan. I had proposed a meaningful dialogue to the new Indian Prime Minister on his assumption of office and was encouraged by his positive response. Unfortunately, the new government persisted with the strategy of a sham election in occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Mr. President, the Kashmir dispute has led to 4 direct or indirect wars between India and Pakistan between 1947 and 1971. India has the 3rd largest army in the world today, almost all of which is deployed against my country, Pakistan. South Asia lacks a regional security system. We in Pakistan have made several proposals for conventional arms control. 1, the negotiation of a mutually agreed ratio of forces. 2, measures to prevent the possibility of a surprise attack. And 3, the adoption of agreed principles for conventional arms control in South Asia. And over the past 30 years, Pakistan has proposed a series of proposals to contain proliferation of nuclear and missile technology in South Asia. All along, India argued that it opposed bilateral or regional measures and would only accept global non-proliferation policy. The Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty is exactly the kind of global measure for non-proliferation and disarmament that India had been championing for 40 years. Yet, unfortunately, India chose to veto the treaty in the Geneva Conference on Disarmament, and it opposed the treaty in the UN General Assembly just last month. So now the world can see the reality. Mr. President, let me state that just as we are prepared to sign any and all nuclear treaties if India simultaneously signs with us, any step of nuclear escalation by our neighbor will find a response from us to preserve our national security. I would like to take this opportunity to propose to this August Assembly that it endorse the convening of a multilateral dialogue for peace and security in South Asia, including the participation of not only Pakistan and India, but of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council and other major powers like Germany and Japan. This multilateral conference could cover 3 critical areas. 1, the resolution of the Kashmir dispute and other bilateral problems between India and Pakistan. 2, the promotion of conventional arms control and confidence building measures. 3, measures to promote nuclear restraint and arrest the danger of a nuclear arms race in South Asia. I believe that such multilateral talks offer a framework for genuine negotiations which can lead to resolution of disputes, arrest the nuclear threat, and promote prosperity in South Asia. And I hope that this proposal will evoke support in this Assembly and from India. Mr. President, a clear distinction has been made by the United Nations between terrorism and the legitimate struggle for national liberation. We in Pakistan will always be in the forefront in the effort to combat terrorism because we have been frequent victims of these crimes from across our own borders. This year alone, we faced a series of cross-border terrorist attacks, but by the grace of God, we were successful in arresting different rings of cross-border terrorists. However, I would like to take this opportunity to express deep concern on behalf of 1 billion peace-loving Muslims at the propaganda by certain quarters. Some quarters are trying to present terrorism as something peculiar to the followers of Islam. And this is wrong. There is no place in Islam for acts of terrorism. However, let us acknowledge that in the post-Cold War period, we are witnessing the rise of extremist fringe groups in the East and in the West. Whether it is the rise of Hindu fundamentalism, Islamic militancy, Judaic extremism, Le Pen's racism in France, or the Oklahoma bombing in America, a number of youth are turning to acts of violence.